Oh. Well, actually, I don't actually think I've ever given a talk on the history of Mozilla to a large set of people, which is pretty shocking. Oh, okay, so I'm going to give it a try. I'm not sure I've actually given a talk on the history of Mozilla to this many people, so that's probably an indication that I need to do more of it. But Mozilla's been around for a long time, since 1998. And I thought when we got started, I'd like to ask, of the people here, how many have been at Mozilla for, say, 3 months or less? Can you raise your hand? Okay, excellent. How many here have been here a year or so? Well, that's a pretty good group, too. Okay, how about the 5-year? Pretty good. And I'm going to say the 10-year. How many people? Where's Randall? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there's 9 people in this room who've been working on Mozilla for 10 years or more. And there's probably another 9 or 10 people in this gathering today who have been here that long as well. And so I'm going to explain the different roles that we had in the early days. I'll try and name some names as we go along. I won't get all of those names, but if you see those people and have questions about Mozilla or Mozilla history, find a good time and ask them, because we all have many, many memories. So Mozilla started in 1998. It came out of Netscape. Netscape at one time had been the almost monopoly browser vendor. It was the first commercial browser, so we had, 99% market share at one time. It was a pretty exciting time. That was when the internet and the web actually really exploded. Microsoft appeared. Microsoft started building its own browser. Microsoft did a couple of things. It ended up eventually building a good browser. And it also engaged in a whole range of illegal activities. And so the combination of that changed the landscape dramatically. And Netscape management had the foresight to recognize they could not continue and be successful in the way they had been operating. And so they realized, with the help of the engineering folks at Netscape, that the best opportunity was to convert their typical proprietary closed commercial product into an open source product. Now, this was radical in its day. Open source is mainstream now. It was not then. Open source was deep, deep, deep in the technical community. It never surfaced in a product. It was all sort of odd. And it was a very radical move. The second thing that happened is that management team, I was there at the time, a lot of us were, but I was part of these discussions, realized that an open source project had to be real. And so inside Netscape was created a small group of people who were chartered with the job of building a successful open source project. And there was a larger group of people, engineering, that was chartered with building a successful Netscape product. And that Netscape product was designed to make money for Netscape and ultimately money for AOL after AOL bought Netscape. And so in the very early days of Mozilla, through 98, 99, 2000, we had these two different groups. We had the engineering group, which was 100 or 150 people working on building the Netscape Navigator product, managed by a set of people wanting to use that product to make money for AOL. Then we had a very small group of people who were chartered with building Mozilla as an open source project, building contributors from all sorts of different places, and building a technology base that was useful for many different companies. The open source side. And that was small in name. There were 6 or 8 of us. Of those, Mick was one of them, Jerv was one of them, Dan was one of them, Brendan was one of them, I was one of them, Shaver was one of them, and then there's a few other folks who aren't here any longer. That was one group. Then we had this very large engineering group building the Netscape Navigator product. And in there, Choffman was there, Johnny was there, Jonas was there, Dee Barron was there. Well, Dee Barron came actually a little later. But there's a bunch of people here in that engineering group. And so that went on for a little while, and it turned out to be not stable. It turned out that the efforts of the Netscape management group to build a product that made money for them came into conflict with how we wanted to manage the code base as a Mozilla open source project. And that conflict simmered for a while, and eventually it exploded. Yeah. Oh, yes. Please feel free. Ask questions at any point.
I was curious in what sense
it turned out there are lots of ways to build a browser that makes money that people don't like. So in those days, Netscape had been acquired by AOL, and AOL was a website property. And so to that management team, the browser was a tool to drive people to the AOL website. Well, you can do that, but it doesn't mean you like the product. You can add user interface features to it. You can focus on new buttons and menu items that in those cases were AOL specific. You can put your resources there rather than on security and new features. You might not be interested in features that help people find things across the web because AOL wanted them going to AOL. And so we found that there were immense conflicts. And also, in an open source project, you have contributors, and those contributors have I'll call it an ownership stake. I mean, they're putting effort in, they're building the product. If they're using the product, they have a set of needs that might be different. And so as part of the open source project, we were balancing the needs of our employers, Netscape, with various other people. And eventually, that broke down. So, for example, we'll take user interface, which is always a contentious issue in a product. The single most contentious issue way back in 1999 and 2000 was user interface. Because Netscape would want a user interface that drove people to AOL, and Mozilla wanted an interface that was good for people using the web. So I was the general manager of the small group of people building Mozilla as an open source project. In those days, we called ourselves staff at mozilla.org, or mozilla.org staff. And when the tension exploded over the interface, over really who controlled the code, we had long, long fights about what were the basic processes by which we built the product. So things we take for granted today, like you have to earn the right to be a committer. We fought with Netscape over that. Things like code needs code review. It has to be good enough. That being hired as an employee doesn't automatically make your code good enough. That even after you're hired as an employee, your peers need to decide your code is good enough. So basic things like code review. These were immense fights. And I was the representative of Mozilla, and so when those tensions came to a head, I was fired. Yeah?
So Mozilla was the open source browser?
Mozilla was, in those days, a technology... Oh, I'm sorry. The question was Mozilla the open source browser in those days? And Mozilla in those days was seen as a technology development organization. And Netscape liked to think that it was building the browser.
The initial theory was that it was going to be modeled after the Linux framework, where other people commercialized the technology built by the engineering.
And so for those who... Did everyone hear Dan? The initial theory was like the Linux kernel, where the Mozilla would be the technology development house that built a kernel, and other organizations would build the commercial products from it. Okay, so we had these ongoing tensions, and one of them was Mozilla was becoming a product in its own right. It turned out that as the Netscape and AOL management began building their product to drive traffic to AOL, more people started using the Mozilla version than the Netscape version. And so that was going on in the background, but and led to some of these tensions. So I was fired, and the belief at Netscape at the time was that by getting rid of me, Netscape management would then have the ability to control the Mozilla open source project and could convert it into a set of people that helped Netscape build the product that Netscape wanted. Right? Essentially to view community as a free workforce that would help build a Netscape product. And of course the competing view is that we are all building an open source project and it has to meet the needs of community, and that the people who contribute and build the product have some say in what happens to it. And so what happened at that point was that the two groups of people, the small group of people that had been Mozilla.org staff, and the larger group of people, which were all the engineers contributing to Mozilla, really united to form one shared outlook. And what happened was essentially the engineers working at Netscape were very clear that the leadership that they were following was Mozilla, and it was me. And it was not their management. And so everyone involved voted to continue to try and build an open source project. And so I remained the general manager of Mozilla. I remained the leader of the Mozilla project and the spokesperson for the development of the Mozilla project, much to the surprise of the Netscape and AOL management. And so we learned a lot of lessons out of that. You know, we learned from that leadership depends on who will follow you, right? That you need to lead people. My own view is you have to be leading in the right direction enough of the time that enough people follow, or enough people also lead in that direction. And that, yeah.
What year did this?
This would be, I was fired in 2001. And it, yes.
I was there at the time.
Yes.
I wasn't there for long.
Yeah. Yeah, Jerv was there. So that was 2001 when I was fired, yes.
So right now, what made you get to the point that you would risk your job over this?
Yeah. The question was, the open web is here today. It's easy to see why it's important. Back then, in those days, before the open web, how did you know? What made you willing to risk your job? And, you know, we'd been working on a browser for a while, and so we could tell that the browser was important. And it was clear at that time Microsoft had, by that time maybe 95% market share in the browser, in the operating system, and in the productivity suites, Office and Excel, which were the only things that people used in those days. And so it was clear that in those days, Microsoft controlled access to the internet. We didn't call it the open web then, but it was the internet, and we knew it was great. And it was very clear that the browser, by controlling the browser, Microsoft controlled how individual people experienced the internet. That the server side of the internet in those days was developing and growing and becoming richer and more capable, but the client side was deteriorating. And through that client, Microsoft was able to just ignore formats, so make vast quantities of content unavailable to people, and to determine the business model through which you could access content, and to have an immense influence over the entire structure of the internet. So that much was clear. So it sounds melodramatic, but the future of the internet was already an issue at that point. And it was very clear the browser was the leverage point. And we were very clear about our jobs. One second, I'm going to tell a couple stories, and then I'll get to you, Chris. But we were very clear that our jobs are on the line. And it wasn't just me. It was everyone I named, and Marcia. Is Marcia here? I didn't see her hand go up. But we would have meetings, a small group that was Mozilla.org, when the tensions got really high, and we would get together and we would say things like, what happens if AOL pulls the plug? What happens if we're all fired tomorrow? How do we keep Mozilla operating? And so those would be things like our release engineer at the time had the keys to the server room where the Mozilla machines operated. These are small details, but they were really important at the time. And we believed, we knew that Leaf, if things came to it, and he would help us keep Mozilla operating. And we knew that Chaffman was running the engineering organization, and we knew that he would be helpful. As it turned out, we needed him. And Marcia had the keys to the closet that had our single supply of Mozilla T-shirts, right? Which I bought with my own money. Oh no, that was later. Never mind, the ones I bought later. But she had that key, and she had access to some other things. And so we would sit and think, how many machines do we need? How many employees do we need? If we have one employee, is it Leaf, who runs the build machines? If we have one employee, is it Brendan? Who is it, and what's the best way to keep Mozilla operating? But when it came to it, I was the only one who was fired, and so the rest of the Mozilla folks were left, and Chaffman provided a haven for us to try and continue to be effective as well. So this was this first era, and so after I was fired, there were a bunch of people still at Netscape and working on Netscape Navigator. As part of that, we finally managed to ship our first product as Mozilla. Mozilla 1.0, we called it. And this had been a long, long time in coming. That was in 2002. We had started Mozilla in 1998 and expected to have a product very shortly afterwards. But it turned out when got into it that the technology was pretty old, and that Brendan made the decision to really build a new technology base. That technology base is Gecko. And it cost us years to get the rendering engine to a point where we could really build a good application on it and ship it. And we finally did that in 2002. It was Mozilla 1.0. It was technically a good product. It was technically a shockingly good product. And across the open source space where people knew it, they would routinely tell us they were really shocked at how good a product it was. But it was not a consumer product. It was really built by developers for developers. It didn't have a clear design aesthetic. It didn't have an approach to consumers. So it was a very powerful product, and if you couldn't figure out what was really the best user experience, you'd build both and have a pref for it. So it was known as bloated and overweight and technically good, but a poor product. That was 2002. About a year later, AOL decided they were tired of investing in the browser. They still had, I don't know, 75 or 100 or 150 people they were paying to work on the browser, and they weren't really getting anywhere with it. And so at long last, they became interested in taking Mozilla.org assets and giving them to those of us who'd been running the project. And again, to give you a sense of what life was like in those days, Mozilla.org assets were the trademark, the name, Mozilla.org, 4 big servers that we fought for that ran all of Mozilla.org, and some startup money. That was really it. Yeah, Mick.
So wasn't it also the case that at the time AOL had just cut a deal with Microsoft to include IE's rendering engine in the product, and so they didn't need Netscape and Gecko as a bargaining chip anymore in those negotiations?
That's definitely the timing. Yes, so was that why? It may well have been. So what Mick said, he said, wasn't it the case that the reason AOL stopped investing in browsers and in Gecko is that they had just completed a deal with Microsoft where they had agreed to use IE or the Microsoft rendering engine in their browser. Is that right?
AOL client.
Yeah, that's right. The old AOL client. That's right, that I've forgotten about. Yeah, so Microsoft Microsoft managed to buy AOL's, out of their own browser effort. But it was good for us because that didn't seem like a lot of assets, but it was really critical to us. We had thought before about starting our own effort at Mozilla.org, but without the name, it would have been really, really hard. And 4 giant servers doesn't seem like that much today, but in that era, it was a big deal. We also got some seed money from them. We got $2 million. And that was a funny story, too, because I had ended up working with Mitch Kapor. I don't know if you know from Lotus, those who remember Lotus 1, 2, 3. And Mitch had come to see that open source was really important after he'd left Lotus. And he had his own open source organization, and I was working with him. And he really stepped in to help us. So Mozilla has a history of things appearing when we need them. There is that saying that, is it luck, or is it effort, or is it skill? And Mozilla has been blessed with all three. Immense effort, tremendous skill, and this luck that things appear. So Mitch appeared, and he essentially arm wrestled AOL for that seed money. And we looked at the $2 million, and we thought we could support maybe 10 people for 2 years. Because we had sat down as Mozilla.org and thought to be effective as a project, the minimum number of people we needed was 10. Running the machines with one person, would keep the project alive, but we couldn't be successful. And Mitch pitched in a little bit of other money, and IBM and Sun were our first commercial partners, and they pitched in some money, and we started with maybe 12 or 13 employees. So what that meant was Johnny Stenbeck and Dee Barron. That was the platform team. One person on Firefox for the front-end team, one person on Thunderbird, one release engineer, Chaffman as engineering manager. Mick did the ultimate sacrifice and ran our systems for us for a year or two before we were able to get him back into a role that really fit him better. We had one person helping who's not with us, on sustainability. Brendan as Brendan, and me trying to and be successful. And that was it. And that seemed like a lot to us.
ASA was QA.
That's right. I forgot ASA. How could I forget ASA? And project management. And still, phenomenal. From that day till now, phenomenal. Whenever I have a problem with my browser, ASA is always able to figure out what it is. So that's it. No one else can ever do that. But
So that's why he sits next to you.
And so all of a sudden, we had our own independence. And it was pretty scary. 10 people's not really enough. There was no ongoing financial sustainability that we knew of. It was a gamble. But we had our own independence, and we could make a product. And so we made phenomenal changes in that period. It was our second set of phenomenal changes. When we were founded, we made up an organization that was revolutionary, as Chaffman described. How did you work with a company? How did we do code review? How did you earn your authority? There was nothing quite like it before. When we started the foundation, we remade ourselves over again. We were, as I said, a small number of people. We made a bet on a new product. That was Firefox. We didn't have a product to ship at that time. And ASA, with our community involvement, continued to ship the Mozilla Suite for 15 months as the only product we had in the marketplace until Firefox was ready. And so we made that bet, which is a scary bet. Like, imagine not to have a browser, we didn't have a person working on the product we were shipping. But we did that because we knew that Firefox was our opportunity to make a commercial product. And our first 5 or 6 years of life taught us that technology alone will not change the industry the way we want to. Technology alone does not change people's lives the way we want to do that. Our opportunity with the browser is to have a product that touches people. Yep?
What did you say that critical changes in Firefox were with respect to?
Yeah, so that's what I'm going to get there. That's what I'm trying to get to. That technology alone is not enough. That raw power of technology is not enough. That if you really want to touch people, not us, not power users, not developers, but if you want to touch consumers and change their lives, you have to be utterly committed to that. You can't build the features that you want just because you want them. You can't tell people, oh, you should behave this way, you should want to be this way. You have to build a product that is elegant and beautiful and powerful under the covers, but that people love. That was the first thing. That is a big change. Many open source projects never make that change. I've started calling it the tyranny of the product. Like if you're serious about wanting to touch hundreds of millions of people, you have to be committed to those hundreds of millions of people. And you can't just think they're stupid or they don't understand. You have to really be committed to making their lives better. And so that's what Firefox did. So we rewrote it, but didn't rewrite all the switches and all the preferences the way our first product had. We also made an initial experience for people that they could relate to. That is our start page. Before, yeah.
I think we were talking a little bit about how Firefox came to be.
Do you want to?
Sure. Well,
Right, you have to, you don't have a mic, so, and there is no mic for that. How about you chime in. So I'm going to step back. How did Firefox come into being? Firefox had started a number of years before, in 2001 maybe, where it became clear that the old product had a bunch of problems. Not only was it really built for developers and much too powerful, and not too powerful, but not elegant and not beautiful in how it displayed its power. And it was a combined browser, email client, IRC client, app launcher environment. And this was a cause of intense fighting. And so a small group of engineers went off and had an idea for doing something more elegant, just a browser. That was focused on a product your family would want to use. So there were 5 or 6 of them.
I think 2 of them maybe worked for Netscape, and so they were also working on the suite at the same time, and they were doing this in their spare time, and a few of them were in the community as well.
Yeah, so Dan says a couple of those guys were at Netscape working on the suite as their day job, doing this in their spare time. Some were community members, and some were non-engineers, like Asa was involved, and so on. And so that had been bubbling along for a while. It wasn't anywhere near done. And it was both the source of a relief and some contention for the engineers working on it. So was there more you wanted to say? Okay. So it had been bubbling along. It existed in a source code repository. I think when we formed the foundation, it was 0.2 or maybe 0.3. And that's probably a good time to tell the story of the name of Firefox. So when it was first started, the engineers thought, wow, we're building a new browser out of the ashes of Mozilla 1.0. And so it was named Phoenix.
Even before that, it was named Mozilla/browser after where it lived in the source tree.
For a really non-product, but Mozilla/browser, when it came to have a name, it was Phoenix. Well, there is a company, Phoenix Technologies. It's a BIOS company. It's been around forever. They once had a browser kind of thing. And so the world of trademarks, they contacted us, and so we couldn't use the name Phoenix. And we looked at it, and they were probably right. They had a product that was pretty close. So, of course, from Phoenix, the next obvious name is Firebird. So our browser was Firebird for 1 or 2 releases. And it turns out there still is, an open source database project by the name of Firebird.
Which itself spun out of another project. It was from the ashes of exactly the same name.
So, not really legally trademark violation, because distinct enough, but certainly perceived as unfriendly and awkward and difficult. And so that went on for a while, and Brendan, unbeknownst to any of the rest of us, posted something that said, okay, you're right, we're going to change the name, we'll change it before we ship our next version. That was a problem. Because it meant that the version was ready to ship before we had a name for it. And shipping it with no name seemed like a loss of momentum. Brendan had made a commitment. And so we had a really intense emotional survival fight, like a couple of weeks, I think it was a couple of weeks, of trying to figure out what we were going to call this thing. And the developer, Ben, liked the idea of doing something with fire in the name. And so went through a dictionary or a book, looking for all the words that start with fire that might make sense. And so we started going through them. On the side, we were doing a very professional process of thinking about, what does a browser mean? How do you develop a brand? Is it navigation? Is it freedom? Is it these kinds of words? What are the values you associate with it? Is it trust or is it fun? And we had this very professional process on the side. But the reality was the name was chosen when Ben had a list of words that started with fire. We started looking at the ones we liked, and then taking the ones we liked and looking to see which of them didn't have trademark problems. And Firefox was the one. Turned out it had a slight trademark issue, but we were able to resolve that one. And we also knew that it had a mascot. We could have an image that would be good. And I think it might have been Asa who first found the Chinese red panda, that there really truly is an animal called a firefox, and it's adorable or whatever. And so there we were. So we picked a name, and then we were able to ship Firefox 0.8. 7. 7? Okay, 7. So this would be in 2004. So this is in the spring of 2004. We've had the foundation for 7 or 8 months. We're burning through our money. We're trying to figure out how are we going to support ourselves. We have a good-sized community. We have an office, a very, very funky sublease from some friends of the Mozilla project who in the giant dot-com boom had gotten a lot more office space than they needed, and so had given us this little funky sublet. There is one picture of it floating around. If you've seen that picture of 10 or 12 of us at a table with the cables hanging down in the middle of it, it had no running water. You had to go back into the janitor's closet in the back of the building to get running water or to wash any dishes. And so, we bought a portable dishwasher, and we'd roll it down to the janitor's closet to wash our margarita glasses, mostly. And so we're finally able, in the midst of all of that, we have a name, we can ship our product. So we shipped 0.7, and I think it was 0.7, I guess. And it was when we got to 0.8 with Firefox, which would have been in May or June of 2004, that we finally understood we had a chance, like a real chance, because 0.8 of Firefox was far enough along that people started noticing it. And the number of people using Firefox started to grow. And pretty soon there were more people using Firefox 8 than had ever used the Mozilla suite. Something like 1 million or 2 or 3 million. And the other way that I knew that we were on the right track was Tim O'Reilly called us up. I mean, I've known Tim forever because I've been in the open source world for a number of years, but this time he called up to say, hey, we're hearing a lot about Firefox. Can we come down and talk to you? And Tim O'Reilly's greatest skill is he has a phenomenal nose for what's new and what's coming and what technology is going to be interesting. So there were a lot of clues. And then the summer of 2004 was a long summer, because in between 0.9 and 1.0 was 5 or 6 months. It's when the extension system was built. I think I've been the most nervous I've ever been in that phase. I remember speaking, and I could not, I was on a panel, but I walked across the stage constantly. I was sick to my stomach because we knew this was our big bet. We could see that stuff was happening, but it's that pressure of you have to ship the product. And so the final phases of Firefox, getting the first version out, were the start page. And before Firefox, the start page had been a typical open source project. Hi, want to help? Here's Bugzilla. Don't like Bugzilla? Here's Despot. Don't like that? Here's the link for Tinderbox. And so when we made the commitment to ship a consumer product, we realized, wow, that doesn't help most people. So. Unlike Bugzilla, which is smooth and lovely, that shows you our standards, right? So, but this was again an immense, emotional, intense, like knockdown, drag-out fight. What to do? How much commercial relationship do we have? And there is the point of maintaining our values and doing things in a way that represents our values and being where people are. And there's often no easy answer. In the past, we have voted, we will go where people are. That's how we have impact. We could be an open source project. We were a very successful open source project in 1999, where we had thousands of people already contributing to Mozilla. We were irrelevant to the marketplace. We were irrelevant to consumers' lives and irrelevant to citizens' lives. And we changed that with Firefox. And we changed that by consciously deciding to go where people are. And we even did a commercial relationship with Google and Yahoo, which of course turned out after the fact to be what sustains us going forward. But we did those commercial relationships because we wanted search and we thought that they would be good. Now, after the fact, it turns out they've generated the money that allows us to grow. And so sustainability is also an important piece. How do you build those relationships in a way that have Mozilla values in them? We've done that before. We'll continue to do that. And now I'm trying to think about, do we want to have questions? Has everybody asked the questions they have? I can keep talking or we can go on to questions. I do want to close at the end, but go ahead.
At what point in time had you an idea that you could have financial sustainability? So you just said that you made this
Right.
employee ID, but how early before you reached deciding something?
Yep.
The first check arrived and it was like 9 times bigger than you thought it was going to be.
So we knew that we shipped Firefox 4, Firefox 1 in November of 2004. And we had a goal of, like, I don't know, 10 million downloads in 30 days, I think, which we passed in 10 days. So we knew by December that the amount of money we would be getting was beyond our expectations. We didn't know how far it would go. So we had been hoping to be able to generate enough revenue to sustain those 10 people or 12 people. Like at the time, we didn't even know how to sustain those. And so by January 1st, we knew that we would be able to do that. The response to Firefox 1 was sort of the stuff of dreams. Now, it turns out those are also stressful times. What happened, we shipped Firefox 1. By February or March, there was a security issue that we didn't actually know how to fix right away. Like a lot of times when a security issue is reported, it turns out figuring out the problem is the hard part, and fixing it is the easier part. But this was one, it was a class of vulnerability that someone somewhere, was this the guy in Japan? I think someone had figured out a new way of attacking products. And so we had this immense focus and attention and user base growing and this phenomenally difficult product to try and deal with it. Really, Johnny. So someday, if you see Johnny Stenbeck and you want to know what immense pressure is really like, ask him about that period, the 1.05 and 1.06. And so, like, success has its own issues. That was one of the things that we learned. Like, it's phenomenal to be at the center. And so we experience that with Mozilla today. Like, success is phenomenal, but it brings its own stresses and tensions. And if you're not careful and you just focus on the stress, it's easy to forget that is the sign of success. And so the sign of success in that era was that we had this product. Like, it was critical to fix this problem right away. And you don't know how to do it. Everybody's looking at you. You really have to be more than you thought you could be. It's immensely stressful. That's success. So if you find yourself in those settings today, of course, try and step back, take a deep breath, be healthy, get some exercise, do all of those things. But remember that that level of stress and tension reflects the importance that we have, how critical we are to people's lives, and is a measure of success. Not the best measure. There's plenty of more fun measures. But when you're in the middle of those settings, it's important to remember that if we didn't matter, then that stress isn't going to be the same. Yes?
Can you tell us a little bit about the history of the foundation and how the corporation came to be?
Sure. When we started as a foundation, there was never any question about that. AOL knew that would be the case. All of us who wanted to work for it knew it would be the case. So we set it up that way. And then, as in December of 2004, it became clear that we were going to get significant amounts of money. I think December was probably a $3 million check, as I remember, something like that. And so we had hoped to make that much in a year, and suddenly we had it in a month.